a large crowd interested in this topic. It's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, that I feel very passionately I want to share with you. So my name is Susie Van Patten. I'm the Global Practice Lead for Threat for Professional Services here at Palo Alto Networks. So a little bit of background about that. I've been with the company now 5 years. I've been doing firewalls since '97, and prior to that I was a COBOL programmer. Just ask the person who's bald next to you and they'll know what that is, the old people. So when I got here, I found that we at Professional Services got very good at migrating old rule sets to our firewalls. But when it came to now changing those rules and the associated security profiles, that's where we have a harder time, because you have to maintain business at the same time. You can't start over. So why this presentation? I'll cover these few things. I'm going to show you a framework that the threat practice has built, along with input from other parts of the company, that will make your life much easier. I have a philosophy of keep it simple. So I'll show you the threat practice and what you can do, the threat practice framework and what you can do to start using it. So why this presentation? I've been visiting customers for a very long time, and I started to notice that everyone seemed to be making similar, I wouldn't call them mistakes, but interpreting how to implement our firewalls the same way that makes their life a little more difficult. The first one being visibility. Either they're not being informed of critical messages that they should be informed of by the firewall or by their SIM, right? They're not seeing a critical system alert, or they're not seeing when one of the files that was passed up to Wildfire is determined to be malicious. Or, on the other hand, they're seeing too much. They have so many emails set up to come from that firewall that they're ignoring them all, and they're all being put in a folder somewhere and nobody's reading them. So the critical ones just get mixed up. That started me thinking, hey, what about a framework? What about an easy to implement way to start that firewall out that we've already figured all of that out for you? Second was app ID awareness. It's hard to go to a server administrator and say, the rule that's allowing port 80 and 443 into your web server, we now have applications. So could you look through this list of 2,500 app IDs and tell me which one your server is running? They don't know. They don't know, you don't know. So how could we make that easier, that you could actually identify which of the 8 or 9 apps running through that rule are the ones that you really need for that server? It has to be something you can fit into your day. Trust me, I see it. You guys have no time. I've seen that. No time to add additional work. However, the process of tuning has to happen either on your old rule set or simply through kind of a seed group of rules above it that you can pretty much figure out what should my new rule set, my new better next generation rule set look like. The SOC sometimes seems to be doing a little bit of duplicate effort, not understanding exactly how we automatically change things and block things, and then they come in and say, hey, block this, and now you've blocked it twice. So what we see happening is people fall back to their old ways. Port-based, it's easy, you're not going to break business, but at the same time, you're not fully protected. Last time I spoke, I stayed in one spot, so I'm working on my engagement. So we need a framework for day one. This framework is not best practices, which you cannot achieve on day one. If you fully implement everything in best practices, you will break your firewall. If you block URL category unknown day one, you will break your network. There are things that need to be implemented after research. And while currently this framework concentrates on day one, we will keep adding to it. So there's a process to move yourself forward as you continue to, customer success is over there. So as you continue to measure where you are with the customer success tool, we're going to give you the ways to do that. So you need an achievable, you need a policy that you can actually reach. You need a place you can actually get to, and then it has to be sustainable. It can't become something so unwieldy that you can't continue to maintain it, and it just becomes bigger and bigger and more spaghetti-like, you know. So this is a proven configuration. We've been using this threat framework, is what we call it in the PS organization, for quite a long time successfully. So there's been a lot of feedback, and this has grown over 2.5 years. So every customer I visited sort of became a guinea pig for me, which was nice. And I appreciate all of you, some of you in the crowd, that allowed me to play around with your data, because it's extremely difficult to test out a framework on a little home firewall at the Van Patten house. It just doesn't work. We need real data from real companies. And the proper amount of logging and alerting, we covered that. I've seen, you know, with the logging and alerting is interesting. A lot of times what we'll see is customers will set up logging for the features they currently implement. Later on, they go and they implement more features, and they never go back and implement the logging piece. So a lot of this is highly common sense. Go ahead and log it all. If you're not running the feature, you'll get no logs. But later, when you run the feature, you're already set up. You know, there are many customers I sit with, they say, I think I'm getting duplicates of these, and these ones I don't see at all, and when I go to look and research, I don't see anything. So that's very important, more important than you think. And as a framework, I understand some of your firewalls won't handle the level. And it's a framework. It's not a set in stone read-only. It's a framework for you to start. And then we obviously, in professional services, you know, we don't want you to break your business on day one. It has to be, like I said, not best practices day one, but a proven day one framework that you can use. So this is all that's included with it. The logging and email alerting, these are templates, right? The day one security profile groups, and then customized reports for tuning and threat. And we've used these reports to tune customers and to teach. It's been highly valuable. From the guy we walk in and say, he's like, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm a router guy. And a week later, he says, wow, I really understand the flows on my network and what I really need to allow through. So let's get right into what it looks like. And if you're wondering if it's going to be available to you, it's publicly available on GitHub as of a week ago. So really looking for people to look at it, tear it apart, give us feedback. The project's called Iron Skillet, Iron-Skillet. So with logging, as I said, we start off with everything. We do a lot of post-cutover threat assessments. We do what we call transformation assessment workshops, and we can't measure what we can't see. So we go in with these and fill in the visibility gaps as much as we're able, depending on the restrictions of the particular device, you know. And as I said, a lot of these you're not going to be using immediately, but log it anyway. There's no harm in logging it anyway. One thing I see with Wildfire a lot is folks will be sending 3 file types up. And when I ask them, they'll say, well, those are the file types that you supported when I implemented the firewall 3 years ago. Well, we now support a lot more than that. So why not say any? You know, make it easy on yourselves. Say any, unless you have, you know, restrictions that require you not to share certain things. But even then, you know, make that an exception. And by the way, even though I'm only showing you this one screen, there are 4 places on the panorama that you'll set the logging up. The system logs, the critical logs for the panorama, as well as for the firewalls, and then the device group that's going to forward everything up, cause the firewalls to forward everything related to rules up, and then of course the collector groups. Those are all set up. And what we do to make this work is the framework has a stand-in email profile, a stand-in syslog profile, a stand-in default collector group. So these are things that we can't possibly know in advance. So as we were working, and try to go over this slide, as we were working and we continued to realize that what was stopping us from creating a framework was having those pieces, an email profile, a syslog profile. So it was like, well, let's just put a fake one in, you know, and build from there. And now just all you got to go do is modify them to your own environment, and you're good to go. Again, the alerting is set up, the right amount of alerting. We want your firewall to tell you when something's wrong, but not smother you in excessive emails. This is the framework we came up because when I was visiting customers, and these were threat assessments, and these were 3 days, and I had to give great value in 3 days, and everyone's topology was different, everyone's location of their firewall was further into the network or on the perimeter, or they had 12 zones, or they had 3 zones. I finally realized, wait a minute, if I can look at them in 3 directions, inbound from the internet, outbound to the internet, and internal, that applies to every case. And the great part is that when I'm showing them, I stick with internal, or inbound rules, inbound rules. No URL filtering, no user ID. It's the easiest one. And once we get through the actual tuning of those based on these threat reports, the tuning reports, it's really easy to understand why it's important to switch from port-based to app ID, but also why it's important to block the threats. Once they see them in front of them, they block them. I got to remind myself, we're customers here, as well as people who work with customers. I'm used to talking to PS folks, so if I refer to your customers, that's why. So it's very simple, and initially when I created this very simple structure, I thought, well, Wildfire is going to be the same across all 3. Yes, it is, but in use, I find that as we're configuring these or changing them or modifying them, because there are alert onlys for every one of these, so you can quickly switch back. So every one of your rules gets one of these 3, but you can quickly switch back. But even better, and this is what happens often, is no, I'm not ready to start this, so we switch all of these to alert only. Great part is they're already applied to the rules properly. All the allow rules have one of these 3. And after the post-cutover threat assessment, so we migrate them, we cut them over. Now we do a post-cutover threat assessment. And quite often that leads to switching back to our recommended day 1 profiles because they see what's happening, but they also see what they need to permit. And the just in case, somebody told me that, and I thought, well, that's a great idea for those customers who, when they create a new rule, they forget to put it. Well, what's your most created rule? Probably outbound. So why not another one just in case? The word default, lowercase, means it's going to automatically apply to your rule. Every new rule you create will get that default, just like it will with your log forwarding profile, without you even touching it. So that's just in case. And now I understand that you're going to end up with situations where a rule is going to require something other than one of these 3. But this is a great way to start. And the thing about it is, as you're thinking about modifying a signature or blocking a country or whatever, you can think about it from one direction. Should I block? Let me pick on Spain. Should I block Spain as a source, inbound? Do I need to consider whether it will affect my outbound traffic? No, because I'm only thinking about it from the outside. And the same with the vulnerabilities, and it just makes it easy to consider one direction at a time. So this one here, probably the biggest thing, and again, these start out all the same, and these will likely remain the same. I walked through with a customer one time and when he got to he was doing a security profile group when we got to the setting for Wildfire, and I used to have it just say global, it was just one. He'd say, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to select here, so I thought, let's just keep it all as outbound, inbound, internal, even if it's exactly the same. Because the guy that you hire next to come in and take over, it's crystal clear, crystal clear. Do remember that SMTP can be safely blocked now. So if you use, notice these are all shared. None of these are the defaults. I do not recommend using the defaults. The default doesn't have SMTP blocked, and we used to block it in such a way that it would repeatedly resend, causing a potential denial of service. It does not get blocked that way anymore. It's a different way. It's a 541 message, sometimes a type of thing that actually stops the message from repeating. The other thing is, if you buy the wildfire license, make sure this part is set up. There is no value to the wildfire license if this is not set up. I see that skipped a lot. And some people think the wildfire license allows them to upload files. Now, you can upload files without the wildfire license. This is the value you get, the real-time, every 5 minute, every 1 minute, newly created viruses. But without this right side set up, there is no value. You've wasted your money, basically, if you don't set up this right-hand side. This is 8.0 that I'm looking at right now, but 8.0, neither the default or the critical spyware includes sinkhole enabled. It's blocked in the strict. It's not enabled. You've got to do a new one. And then notice I'm filtered on shared. I'm basically saying do not use the defaults. Use these instead. And you'll notice here what we recommend for day one is blocking on the inbound and the outbound critical size mediums. But on the internal, there's a lot of brute force you've got to do. And I would love feedback on if you ever run into a situation where blocking critical size and mediums on both the inbound and outbound causes you a problem. Love to hear about that, because we're going to start to advertise more and more. So the more feedback I get, if there is a problem with this that you see, and this has been tested over and over, I would love to hear about it. On the GitHub page has an issues option under the iron skillet that you can feedback anything here. But you will find that you're going to be changing these differently based on direction. And yes, there may end up a time that you come up with another exception, but it should be the exception. It's not supposed to be so hard. It should be easy, much easier. So now let's talk about, so this is what the example is of what's next. What do I do next? Well, let's tune the internal mediums so that we can block it. Leave out the scanners, tune the brute force rules so that we can block it. This is a day one. This is not a what we want you to end up. This is day one. We want you then to move forward, of course. This is highly similar to spyware, so I'm not even going to talk about it, but basically just the same. So getting to URL filtering, okay? And I'm not even dealing with, as the threat practice lead, global practice lead for threat, I'm not dealing with what is your company's policy on adult sites, what is your company's policy on shopping and finance. I'm looking at this from the perspective of threat. And these are the 4 categories we want you to block day one. Now hacking, some people will have a need for hacking, but that should be an exception for a particular AD group, not a, not your general policy. It would make a huge difference if command and control and malware were blocked day one. Huge difference. So much of the traffic that we see is categorized as command and control and malware that's actually causing these things to happen. We definitely want you to research and block when you can the dynamic DNS, the parked, and the unknown. Unknown is hard. I know this, but outbound only. So this URL filtering profile, remember, it's not internal. It's not inbound, it's only on your outbound. And unknown is probably one of the, I look at autofocus and I look at the things and the indicators of compromise and how things happen. Over and over I see, yeah, that file was downloaded and the site they went to was unknown. I see it all the time. Also, I would avoid using the block list and allow list that's in this URL filtering profile. And let me tell you why. So I went and visited a customer. I've learned something, by the way, from every customer I visited, and they had grown to about 15 or 16 URL filtering profiles based on different parts of their network. And they used the block list to block things they wanted to block outright. So while I was there, somebody came over and said, hey, I need you to block this domain or this URL. And they went 15 places. They went to 15 separate filtering profiles and blocked that same domain in 15 places. So what I'm suggesting is, here, I'll actually go to the next, is, see that there on the bottom, is create a custom URL category. That's where you should put them. Now this is, in the allowed URLs is in alert in every one of your URL filtering profiles, and the denied are blocked in every one of your URL profiles. No problem. You put it one place, it applies to all 15, or however many you end up doing. I think that'll save you a lot of time. The other thing, looking here at Do Not Decrypt, don't forget there's a none. I have run these reports and seen, so where are our guys surfing? Well, they're surfing to the Do Not Decrypt category. Wait a minute, that's not supposed to be part of your URL filtering profile. That custom URL category was created for a different purpose. It should be none. So don't forget that none. So this is how we set you up. And the reason for the Do Not Decrypt is just so it's crystal clear. So if somebody buys a firewall, they never talk to PS, they hardly talk to their SE, they set it up all by themselves, this hopefully will give them the idea that there are going to be custom URL categories I create for alternative purposes that I do not want applied. Okay, so now let's start looking. What do the reports look like? So the reports are templates, and on the GitHub page we have multiple ways that you can load the framework. The reports require some, right now they require some copy and paste, but I'll show you later the report wizard that Albert is putting in it's almost done. You can still do the manual process. Basically the reports, because all these customers I visited had 12 zones, 3 zones, whatever, I realized if I simply can define internet for the customer, that's all I need to do. So I only reference internet in my queries. And internet is, a lot of times it's a zone, right? Untrust. Other times it's 2 zones. Other times it might be further into the network, so it's zone untrust less 10/8, or zone untrust less, 192.168. So the first time I did it wrong, a customer had untrust, I don't know what it was called, but basically untrust as one of their zones. And in their interfaces, their Ethernet interfaces, they had nothing else. That was it. So I set it all up, and I modified the rules, or the reports. And after I started showing him, I said, look what's coming in from the internet. And they said, that's not the internet, that's the tunnel. Well, then I go look at the tunnel interface, and it's also untrust. So I'm like, oh crap, what am I going to do? We've got traffic coming in, and so for that one, I literally had to modify it to be ingress interface. So that worked out. I referenced that specific interface. I did suggest naively, why don't we just go change this to another zone right now? And the customer's like, oh no, we're not changing it, So I had to think of an alternative. But other than that, I have found internet is a zone, or a couple zones generally, less a couple of networks, generally speaking, and that's worked really well. So the wizard that Albert has created lets you put those things in, and it changes your rules for you. The manual method is on GitHub. Actually, that's kind of a lie, because it'll be on GitHub by the end of the day, okay? So this is the one report I always suggest customers run every day. Now, a lot of this obviously can be moved to your SIM, right? But this gives you a good, I call it a SIM in a box kind of thing. We have customers with no SIMs. They are syslogging. They are not parsing. They don't have it set up to tell them what they need to know when they need to know it. This gives you a start, right? So these are the compromised ones. So these are real customers, highly anonymized, but 7 days worth of sinkhole. So this customer's got some problems, and we ran this, and he said, whoa, I've got some work to do, 15,000 times this host tried to go to malicious domains. And by the way, if a customer is not ready to do block to start with, the one thing I always ask them to do, said, you know what, the one thing I can't measure with these reports, because we also do customers who already are set up. So it's a bit of a retrofit, because you're not starting with this nice clean framework, you're sort of retrofitting in this stuff. So we do a visibility gap analysis, figure out where they're missing the stuff that we need to see. And the one thing I always tell them is, I can measure what's happening on your network with alert, except for sinkhole. And generally speaking, they'll at least do that. And then I literally go into the alert only sinkhole one and modify it, just turn that on, because I can't measure if it's block, and I can't measure if it's 127.0.0.1. We can measure it only if sinkhole, and they'll do that, and they'll do it. They'll turn that one thing on. This one is showing bad sites, and that's why I consider those 4. This is malware, command and control, phishing, hacking. So you've got these guys 10,000 times this first IP, and these are real. Went out to malware sites, and this one takes it down to what exactly is the category of the particular site, just to make sure, you know. All right, so those are the compromise reports. Then we get into tuning, and tuning is a lot of reports, but it doesn't mean you look at every one of them. A lot of them are there. For instance, if you look at that middle set there, inbound rules with threat is all threat, whether blocked, whether allowed, in one report. And depending on the size of your network, how much traffic you have, that usually will do the trick. But there's other networks that are so complex that folks find it easier to look individually at not just the viruses versus the spyware, but also at the client to server, the server to client, both different directions. So over time, we've built enough that you can kind of decide. And there will be times that you'll have to modify this. For instance, on the outbound URL tuning reports. The way I have it written is if you have unchecked the box that says log container page only for URLs, it's almost a useless report, because the URL spreads across it's so long when you're not just logging the container page. You get that huge thing, and you look at the PDF, and it's like, I can't even read this, it's so tiny. So there will be times, depending on what you're doing, and I'm actually considering adding another report to say, if you are logging only container page, use this one. If you're actually logging the container page, use more than the container page, use that one, because they are so different, and it makes that one unusable. So it seems like a lot of reports. This is 3 report groups. There's about 3 report groups per direction. And I had a guy walk by me yesterday, and this was like, okay, the day my baby was born was great, the day I got married, but the day somebody came up to me and said, guess what? He goes, I've got all the inbounds tuned, I've got all the outbounds tuned, now I'm working on the internals. I was like, oh my God, that's so great. I mean, it's really great to hear that it's really working and helping people create these much better ones. So if we look at how we would use this, and this is, I'm giving you sort of the process. So we are working at automating this as much as possible, because the things that we see through these there are patterns. Patterns means we can automate. So I'm working with Albert, the expedition guru, to start to recognize these patterns, so these reports could be sucked in to the expedition tool, and recommendations come out. That's the goal. And I know some of you hopefully have had a chance to see all the new things with Expedition. He has given me my own little tab under best practices called threat practice. So this is all going to be going into there. So if we look at what we do with customers who set up new firewalls, we do what I referred to as a post-cutover threat assessment. We really want, especially for inbound rules, we want to say, what can we do to make sure you're not going to get hacked tomorrow, right? What rules can we not afford to wait to change? So if you look at this, okay, this is the used rules, right? So this particular customer had 1,000 rules. We quickly realized they were using 250 of them, And of that, they're using what, 20 inbound? So our focus area is 20 rules. That's it. Now, when we look at this, now we say, which of these rules is open from the entire internet and port-based? And I can pretty much tell you, the first 4, they're either already application ID or their source is limited, right? But if you look at that rule ID 160, this is not a good rule. This is most definitely port-based. This is most definitely open from the entire internet, right? This is probably 80 and 443. And the world is going to ride in any application they can over those ports, just trying to get through and see what they can get to. Now, when I remember showing one of these, and they all look, I got to tell you, they all look the same. This pattern is always the same. And he said to me, this customer, he said, there's nothing wrong with this rule. This rule is only allowing port 80 and 443. And I said, well, let's look at what it's actually allowing. And he's like, that's not what I intended. This is not what I intended. And you can use triggers like, what is the bytes per session, right? To see, are these successful connections? Because there are three-way handshakes happening here, for sure. Now, of course, the service that's running on the server that this is talking to is going to reject it, right? Because that's not right, the service. But certainly, this is not how you want to leave this rule. So this is a port-based rule allowing in, I believe it's 80 and 443 on this one. But you're pretty much going to see that. So the only 2 rules I would tell the customer, let's worry about these 2 rules, is that rule 160 because it's obviously open from the entire internet and it's port-based. You can tell this. And rule ID 201, the one above it, because of the unknown TCP. Although even with that one, it makes me, so when I see unknown TCP in a long list, I know it's unknown TCP riding in over an open port. When I see it when it's only 2, I'm a little less worried because it seems very restricted. There's only 2 things coming in. Now I know it's not app-based because nobody is permitting unknown TCP as an app, right? So rule ID 201 is not app-based. Do you see the pattern here? Pretty much, yes? Okay. Now let's move on to the next one. Oh, that's me pointing it out, right? All right, so for instance, here's a customer, a real Australian customer, very anonymized. This is what we see. That's that one we were seeing with the unknown TCP. Is this inbound unknown TCP necessary or not necessary? Well, the fact that there's so much tells over 224, 4 gig over 226 individual sessions. That's a lot of data per session. Enough to say this connection was successful. And now I look at the second report. So that first report is inbound apps by rule, basically. Here's the second one, inbound apps by rule by port. If it was 80, I'd think maybe it was just somebody trying to come in over a port that's open, but it's 3020, it's a very specific port, and you don't have 8 or 9 apps, just 2. This looks more and more like you need it. This is real, this is what you need. By this time, when I'm sitting with the customer's like, yeah, that's my such and so. Generally, they'll know by this point. It's important to go through this with them. So here's the third report in that set, by country. Well, this is an Australian customer, and this is sourced from Australia. So at this point, the customer is very comfortable, even if they don't know it, to go to the, go to the server admin and say, by the way, I'm going to need to allow this, and let's create something for it. And is this one critical? Now, let me show you if we did it the opposite way. Here's the actual rule it came from. I have, messed with it, but the intention of the rule is here. What if I tried to tune the rule instead of looking at the traffic? What the heck would I end up with? I mean, there's no, I can't make sense of it. But now I'm going to end up with 2 rules. The one that allows in the unknown TCP, however that's written in a custom app, right? And the one that allows in the web browsing, and that's it. I've got 2 rules. I don't have to do anything else. And it just makes sense, right? Now granted, you've got to watch your timing. You've got to watch the length of time on these reports and whether you have, obviously, do I have quarterly things that I only do once a quarter? Keep an eye on my time here. So But one thing that is true about this one is I don't really need to worry about it day one. This is not something I need to fix immediately. The sources are limited. Both these things coming in, it's tied down enough that if you walk away after cutting over and you look at this traffic a day or two later, you can say, this one can wait. This one can actually wait. It's not critical. Now that one we saw before, and this was one very similar to it, this one they need to take care of now. It's letting in way too much. Now granted, the SIP, that's a tough one. Because it's UDP, it's recognized on the very first packet. You'll see SIP phantoms all through this, right? But anything TCP, MSRDP, inbound from the internet, I don't think so. Now it doesn't look successful. Look at the bytes per packet, right? It did a three-way handshake successfully. It very well did, may have done a four-way teardown. This is what the port looks like, or the rule actually looks like, port 8080. So this is all over 8080. But then when we look at the country, we start to see, is the HTTP proxy needed, the MSRDP? And we start to see where these things are coming from. And that helps us make the decision, right? Make sense? Yeah? All right, so one more. Very similar. When I first started seeing these, I realized these are plugins, Google Analytics, Twitter-based. These are plugins. These are legit. It always surprised me, and it has generally surprised the customers, that we'd have inbound from the internet, Google Analytics, and Twitter base, but it's legit. It's plugins. So looking at this, the unknown TCP is kind of an odd one. Dividing the 28 into 10, I mean, again, it's something you're going to have to talk to the customer about. But this is port based, so you're going to want to, this one you may have to work with your server and admin and make sure he wants the Google Analytics. We also see a lot of web crawler and various things that people, they just need to make the decision. They need to make the decision, with forethought, right? So this same one, there's the unknown TCP, there's the IRC base. I mean, they pop out at you as you walk through this sort of report flow. This stuff really just kind of pops out at you. So this one here is a repeat of the slide that accidentally got in to my presentation. So now we move on, and I always look at rules before I look at threats, because once you get down to the threats, you've already said, hey, this is going to go away when I make that change that we decided we're going to make on this rule. Now half your threats just go away, right? So this customer, we go back, this customer is using the threat framework. You can tell this is permitted. There is no critical, there are no highs, no mediums here. You see a lot of China, and so I have a story about a customer. As we were looking through their reports, they started thinking, I think I'd like to block Russia outbound, all traffic outbound to Russia because of what I keep seeing. And I said, okay, but let's visit another report of ours called apps by country. So we looked and we found Russia, and we looked, and there was a social media app, Blanca base or something, I forget, and the guy said, you know what? He goes, that's social media. He said, we hired 2 interns from Russia. I bet that's how they're communicating back with their families. I'm going to talk to them first. And he went from, I'm all about blocking all traffic to Russia, to let me make some intelligent decisions based on all this information I'm seeing before I make that decision. So it was great because, the right information is here to make those kind of decisions. So here you could say, okay, ZMU scanner detection. Okay, I'm not going to block loads, but perhaps I go in and go ahead and just turn that one, the action on that particular signature off. Now, if we look at, this is the same traffic. This is the denied, and those are important to look at as well. Obviously, what's being denied, because even if it's not getting through, doesn't mean it's not happening. It's even more relevant if you're looking at traffic leaving your network. Who's infected? What kind of traffic are they generating? We're effectively trying to attack the internet, right? So this looks to me like it's legitimate brute force, not a wrong setting on the brute force in terms of the quantity. We see brute force on the internal a lot as people are monitoring servers or various things. We'll see so many connections that you have to tweak it, and that's why we don't block mediums on day one. So I'm not covering all the reports. There's quite a few in there, but over time I'll be adding to this. I and the others that are working with me on this will be adding to the Iron Skillet GitHub. It may be moved because I'd like you to say, why is this report here? What's it supposed to be used for? What am I supposed to do with it? And once I've done that, can I safely turn it off? Should it become enterprise level? So all of these things, I'm going to do my best to get to you. And if you could give me feedback, it would be awesome. So we're going to be working on all of that. That's what this is. It's a living framework. It needs input from the field. And where to go for help? This GitHub, right? Or, of course, professional services. These are shared with our partners, professional services as well. And I wanted to show you before we go real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on a sec. Yeah, somebody came up with the name Iron Skillet. They're hard. They're tough to break. We thought it was a really, really great. Oh, no, that's what happened to me last time. So it's GitHub. If you just go to the GitHub site and search for Iron-Skillet, you'll find it. Because this happened before, and I had to have somebody come in to switch it back. Or come up and talk to me, and I'll give you that URL if you want. So let me show you this real quick. After I type my 50,000 character password. There we go. So, so this is the Iron Skillet page. And you'll see we have the snippets, which will be added very shortly to the Expedition. If you look at Expedition here, you'll see here under the Best Practices tab is a Threat Practice tab. And currently, this is not quite finished, but this is what I was talking about, the wizard. If I know the customer's internet zones and I know the customer's networks that need to be excluded, fill them in here, and it's going to create that for you. So if I do untrust, and then here I say I also want to leave out this network because it's external. Think of a data center. You know, you've got the users coming in through the same interface the internet's coming in, right? And then calculate, and it's actually going to see if this works. Like I said, he hasn't quite finished this. So yeah, no, it's not going to work. But that's where it will be under this Threat Practice tab underneath Best Practices. And Iron Skillet has a wiki here with various ways to do this. Whether it's load config partial, whether it's pan Python. We even have a modified AWS config because there were a couple things different about this. This is a growing project. We actually, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Scrum and all that, but this was our sprint with a deadline of Ignite. What can we do and actually get you something useful for Ignite? And this is what it is. So just wanted to kind of show you that was there. And I think if there are any questions, yes. The dependencies. How to make those go away? Because you really don't need them sometimes. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I thought they were taking away, giving you the ability, or at least I think I saw a feature request where they were giving you the ability to turn off those warning messages. Come talk to me after. And any other questions, comments, please go check the site out, try these things out. I agree, it's harder to retrofit, but yes? What's in what? Well, so Expedition has the customer success, the recommended best practices, and the ability to remediate. But you've got to be careful. If I'm not ready yet to turn SSL decryption on, I don't want to auto-remediate SSL decryption in, right? So that's Scott right there, Johansson. He's with the customer success team. He was just next door. So we're working in combination. So what's in Iron Skillet, we use customer success tools to measure it. To measure, where am I at? How close am I? What do I need to do next? But we are definitely not saying push a button and implement all customer success recommended best practices day one, right? So ours is a process. We work closely together. Thank you, Vicki. Fox. Any other questions? Default. So we have, every signature has a default action, and a lot goes into that, whether it's how critical is it, how prevalent is it, how positive are we that we have the right signature. So on the lows and informational, we recommend using default, and we are starting, you'll notice that on the criticals that a lot of them will have a default action of alert, which is why we tell you to block criticals outright. There's a lot of different reasons go in, and we're working at, they're actually starting to flip these things to a more secure profile. In other words, if you're critical, if you're enough to get a critical severity, your default action needs to be reset both. Now, as for which ones reset both, which ones reset server, reset client, et cetera, I mean, they take all that into account on when they decide which specific action should a particular thing get. I can set you up with somebody who knows a whole lot more about that. He's actually the one that decides what should, he's kind of over that if you come talk to me. Yes? Yes, we're working on that too. But no, you can't, but we will. We're working on that. We'd like for you to have this all there, out of the box, and we'll work towards. That'll be another sprint, right? That'll be another. Yes. Well, this one here first.
Reset both versus block. I mean, I'm thinking that reset is a request as opposed to just keep blocking.
I think block it. Honestly, I'm not quite sure I know. Yeah.
So when you do reset both versus just drop, the key thing is that when it's coming from an internal or coming from external into internal, you definitely want to drop the traffic. You don't want to let the hacker know that you're dropping it. Versus inside, when you're going outside, you want to
Yeah.
reset both because you want to make
Yeah.
sure that you're not having that.
Like passive OS detection or something, right? Don't let them see.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear what your recommendation is for moving towards blocking unknown traffic. I see a lot of sites that, they're classified correctly, but then they're pulling content in to the site itself that's just using an IP address or some long URL that's unknown. So then that functionality was gone if we blocked that traffic.
Yeah. Well, you really have to figure out. So use the block and the alert custom URL categories to basically start. It's going to be a long process. Unknowns are tough. Has anybody blocked unknowns outbound? Oh, he has. So how do you do it?
It does take.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we just block
Yeah.
continue now so that they
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I talked to the Unifor 2 folks, and I was sitting here, and I said, wow, 2 minutes, okay. I said, wow, we see, he said, you're not really ever going to see any unknowns. We come from two different sides. I'm like, oh, yeah, let me show you what we're seeing in the field. So we input to each other quite a bit to say, we consider ourselves to be the funnel between all the threat guys out there to say, hey, what can you consume? Let's give it to you in ways that you can consume. And so, yeah, it's a process. This is going to take some work. Any?
Yeah, I was going to mention for the unknown question, we allow the unknown and then have a policy that blocks file downloads and so forth for any sites categorized, so you let them go.
But don't let them download. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah. 2 minutes? Okay, so if anybody, yeah, so that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you use it. And I hope you provide feedback. So.